Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's side event where we'll discuss how to accelerate defense innovation, focusing on NATO's innovation platform, Diana, the Defense Innovation Accelerator for the North Atlantic. I'm Carl Halding. I'm a Chief Analyst of Strategic Intelligence at Vinnova, and I've been involved in building Vinnova's capacities on dual use and civil-military synergies. I have with me here Alma Jakobsson, my colleague, who is desk officer at the new program for civil-military synergies that we run together with the Swedish Armed Forces. And we're joined today by a great panel. Rob Murray, you would Saab Incorporated, formerly head of innovation at NATO. And you will take us back to the days when you discussed what NATO's Diana was actually all about. We have Moritz Zimmermann from Diana's headquarters, and you will take us you will actually tell us a little bit where Diana is right now and what you're looking forward towards. And finally, Katarina Sandberg from LEAD, the incubator in Sweden that has been nominated to become the Swedish node, accelerator node in the NATO's Diana family. So in this side event, we will reserve the latter half for Q&A, and you will all have the opportunity to pose questions to this panel, and we use a Menti, and I believe there is a Menti code somewhere on your screen or somewhere in the interface. Use that code, take note of it, and you post questions throughout the session. Alma will take care of questions and formulate the questions to the panel later on. So don't be shy and ask away. Well, before diving into the Q&A session, we will ask the panelists to kick off discussion, and starting with Rob, please. Since you were involved at the very beginning, maybe it all came from the back of your head. Tell us a little bit about when Diana was conceived.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks, Carla, and also, huge thanks to Vinnova for facilitating these incredibly important discussions. As I kind of turn the clock back and I smile slightly because I look at the screen, I see my good friend Moritz on the other end. He will remember what I'm about to talk about in so much as when in NATO, really in around sort of 2018, 2019, it became clear that when we looked at the way in which financing was going into the private sector versus the public sector for new technologies, and the way in which the breakthroughs, which perhaps in the military and in government, we might have seen in the 20th century, the government would really bring about new tech and things like GPS, the internet, touchscreen. All these sorts of things came out of government R&D, government investments, predominantly for military use, and actually then created commercial application, which we all live with today. The reason that happened was because of the financing. Huge amounts of money in the government, not so much in private sector in relative terms. Today, that's completely flipped, and therefore it means that a lot of the new technologies and insights are coming from the private sector. And when you drill deeper into that, it means it's coming from small companies in particular, startups, and so on and so forth. So the challenge was, how at an alliance level, how do we think about really harnessing these amazing entrepreneurs, engineers, technologists, startups, and supporting sort of national security objectives at a transatlantic level? And really, that was very much framed into the essence of Diana. And what we realized, there was kind of four things that was necessary, with a bolt-on fifth. First, test centers, having some facilities where startups can actually leverage and use environments to test their technologies. And not just an environment, but also having access to those end users, those military operators and so forth, to help with co-development. The second is actually getting businesses business smart. So what do I mean by that? I mean, it's not good enough just to have great technology. You're solving half the equation by doing that. The other half of the equation is product market fit. And so having an accelerator program that can actually help these startups really become businesses and get into markets. And then the third element is having a trusted capital marketplace. Put simply, there's too much money coming into startups whereby the funds are from adversarial nations. And we were seeing this happening in many countries, and as a result, startups were failing in so much as they weren't able to export their goods and services because they didn't have the authority to do so. And then the final part is rapid acquisition. How can we help these companies that work on very short cycles because of cash flow challenges and so forth, engage with governments where the sales cycle is much longer, much slower, and how do we solve for that? So really these things combined make up the essence of Diana, and then the bolt-on part is having a NATO venture capital fund to help invest where necessary. So that was the genesis of it all, and then there's a much longer story which I shan't go into now and bore everybody, but essentially the politics aligned in around 2020 to allow this to go through under the umbrella policy of NATO 2030. So that's kind of the heritage and the story behind it. Very boiled down. It was a very stressful couple of years, as Moritz will will verify. But that was the thinking behind it. We have to recognize that cash flows have changed, that technologies come from startups, and that we have to think of new ways of working to bring those startups into our ecosystem.
So now you worked with this civil-military synergies and for quite a number of years. First from NATO and now you with Saab. But if you look back, how do you see what's happened to what extent has the civilian innovation ecosystems started to deliver into defense sector, or are there still hurdles for this to happen, and which hurdles are there in such case?
Well, I'd love to hear Katarina's views on this because I think you'll have a great perspective from where you sit at Lead. I think just briefly from my stance,
if you take the defense sector perspective from
so what we've seen here is we've seen an absolute influx of capital into defense tech. So venture capitalists, after the huge valuations that came about in sort of 2022, 21, 22, from across all sort of sectors, if you like, that tailed off. But because of the geopolitical uncertainty that now exists, particularly in Europe, you've just seen this whole sector, this market of defense tech, really burgeoning, if you will. And so what we've seen is there's been a ton of investment at early stage. So it's sort of seed, Series A, that sort of. But I think the challenge, to answer the question, is, okay, is there going to be enough follow-on funding as these growth stage funding as these companies grow? And I think that's the challenge which Diana and the NATO Innovation Fund, they're not going to solve that by themselves, but they're able to shine a spotlight on certain areas where perhaps investment from the private sector can lean into.
Are there still problems with the big money to get the big money to come to the table? I think pension funds and institutional investors and so on.
It's not. So I think there's two answers to that. First, at a transatlantic level, there is a problem, right? So if you're looking at about 85% of the world's venture capital sits in the United States, roughly. Does that money find its way to amazing engineers, entrepreneurs, technologists in Europe? No. Not enough. And there's reasons why, but the result is there isn't enough private capital for the opportunities that exist in Europe. When we think about some of the sort of challenges around, I'll say the narrative of sort of ESG, environmental, social governance, and having pension funds and so forth investing in defense, I don't think that's an issue at the size of companies we're talking about.
Okay.
I think that is more of a factor for larger primes and so forth.
Thanks, Rob. We'll get back to you for sure, and I'll turn to Moritz. Moritz, hi. You're with us from London or from Brussels?
From London.
From London.
From London,
well,
absolutely.
Well, great you could join us. Please give us the latest updates from Diana and what's happening. And you're right now into the pilot phase, the first pilot phase of Diana. So how is it proceeding, and what's on your mind for the future of Diana?
Thanks so much, and thanks a lot for having me. And it's great to see some familiar faces as well in the studio. It looks very cozy, so I'm a bit sad that I'm just dialing in. But very happy to be with you this afternoon or morning, depending on where you are. I think what Rob just described is really kind of the original thinking behind Diana. And to be fair with you, this was our research. This was our assumption when we started negotiating the charter and really setting up this new NATO body. But we didn't really know back then, well, would this actually work? Is there actually market interest for that? And so over the past months, we've had the chance to actually launch Diana's very first activities and get a first-hand look into, well, how's the market responding to this? Is there a market need expressed by the ecosystem that we want to engage with? And is there a market need actually expressed also by the allies to engage with these companies? Because, I mean, ultimately, this is about bringing new technologies also in the hands of our operators. I think one thing to add here before I go a little bit into the workings right now is that I think when we look at the timelines here, you also see that the ambition and the importance that NATO has given to this topic. I think Rob was just talking about the 2020, 2021 timeline. We're now in early 2024. This might sound like a lot to many of you, but I can tell you that for an bureaucratic aircraft carrier that is NATO headquarters, spinning out a new NATO agency and having it kick off its very first activities in such a time frame is pretty unheard of. And we're very proud of that, but I think it mostly shows how the importance and the priority that allies and the alliance itself has given to this initiative, and the importance accorded to incorporating new technologies, disruptive technologies into our deterrence and defense posture. So I think when we look at the first activities that we had now with Diana, we launched our very first call for proposals in June last year. This call for proposals really focused on understanding or increasing situational awareness in underwater environments, for example, for critical infrastructure protection. We focused on energy production in remote locations, and we focused on secure information sharing over open data streams. I think you have to realize two things when you look at these three challenges. So probably the first thing you think is, well, that's not very defense. There could be a bit more defense here. And I think the critical element here is that, as Rob mentioned earlier, we're really focusing on dual use applications. And dual use not only in the way of them being applied for defense, collective defense and security, but that it can also solve actually drivers of insecurities, which would be maybe traditionally not be perceived as really a security and defense question, but they're very much becoming such questions. Yeah? So for example, when we look at the underwater sensing capabilities, this is something obviously we can use for port protection or critical infrastructure protection, underwater critical infrastructure protection, but at the same time, the same technologies can also be used, for example, to study the impact of climate change on coastal zones and so on and so forth. So there's really a dual use space here, not only for the defense environment, but also for the civilian environment. And that's important for us, also to Rob's point of giving these business opportunities, because we want these companies to be able to generate revenues out of civilian commercial applications as well as of defense applications, recognizing that obviously generating revenue out of defense is something that takes a little bit longer than it does in the civilian market. So that's point one that you have to realize when you look at these three challenges. The second point is that these three challenges were not launched because we had a lot of good drinks together and sat around the big table and thought, okay, what could Diana do next? And maybe we have some crazy ideas here. No, these challenges were really launched because we asked the allies, we asked allied armed forces, we asked industry across the alliance to tell us what are the military needs that you currently have? What are the technological challenges that you're currently facing? And I think it speaks for itself if you, for example, look at the critical infrastructure protection challenge that we had the incident with the Nord Stream pipeline very shortly before we had this discussion. So really, there was a clear translation of technical needs expressed by allies that were then translated into these challenges. And the point I want to make here is that these are not nice to haves. These are market signals that the allies collectively, now at 32, are sending to the ecosystem to say, hey, let's work together on this. Because also, again, to Rob's point, this doesn't work if we do it in isolation. It only works when we crowd in additional players like primes, like Saab, for example, in Sweden, academia, and the private sector, and have them work on these challenges collectively, because there's a real added value and interest for them to actually engage in that, because there is this market signal. When we put out this challenge, we expected a couple of applications. We got way too many. We got over 1,300 applications, which I think speaks to the market validation or the market signal validation, really for the need of something like Diana and the interest of innovators and disruptors across the alliance to shape together with us the security environment of tomorrow. We selected 44 companies. We went up from 30 to 44 because the quality of the applicants was so high. These 44 companies have all received 100,000 euros in grant money for their participation in Diana. What's important here and what sets Diana apart from similar initiatives elsewhere is that we've gotten this, these companies have received the grant money. We don't take intellectual property. We don't take equity. We don't have any right of refusal, not any rights of usage. So meaning we have completely no strings attached to this money. Why is this important? This is important because we want to be easily accessible. We don't want to tarnish cap tables before these companies have even emerged out of this kind of innovator or startup level, and we want to give them easy access to understanding defense and security. If we put more barriers into place, less entities will be interested in actually, well, joining us and working with us. These 44 companies have now started in January, and that was honestly a beautiful moment, and I will never forget going through the very first kickoff that we had. These 44 companies are now there in flesh. They actually exist. It's wonderful to see them. Extremely motivated companies from across the alliance. They're now being accelerated in 5 locations: in Copenhagen, in Turin, in Tallinn, in Boston, and in Seattle. In each location, we have roughly 10 companies, 10, 15 companies, very much focused on strengthening convergences between these companies and strengthening collaboration between these companies. All of these companies are now going through an accelerator program. In this accelerator program, again, to earlier points made, we look at providing these companies with business development expertise. We want them to become effective companies, working companies. We want them to scale. We want them to strengthen the allied innovation ecosystem, not just by fostering the innovative spirit in it because people can see scaling opportunities, but we want them to strengthen the ecosystem by generating value and money, because only if these companies are actually able to survive will they be able to engage with us in defense procurement cycles and also stand ready in times of crisis and whenever we need them to actually collaborate with them and integrate them into our armed forces. At the same time, obviously, these companies are learning about defense and security, and I think it's quite an interesting learning experience to witness, because defense and security is not an adapted space to the startup environment. This is the very reason why Diana was launched. It's the very reason why the NATO Innovation Fund was launched. And that's the very reason why multiple allies are looking at setting up similar initiatives. And they're looking at small, quick wins that they can get off the Diana program to really product market fit their ideas and to get first user feedback on the applicability of their solutions. We've already seen some of these innovators now use our test center network. We've only just launched the grant process for this a couple of weeks ago. So we already now have first tests that have been carried out in test centers, which is a fantastic result for us, and we're very happy about it. And we're now looking at next week, for example, where we're going to have our first outreach day with over 300 participants from governments, from the private sector, from investors, and obviously our startups that will be there and really will be brought together to give them exposure and expertise over the years to come. Great. At the same time, obviously, we're looking at developing the mechanisms that Rob was describing earlier. We look at the rapid adoption service, so really helping allies adopt these technologies at speed, and also at building a trusted community of investors. But these are also work strands where we have to recognize that this is something that just will take a little bit longer. Just to finish up, we're now obviously gearing up to the next challenges where Swedish innovators will be very, very welcome to apply, and we're very much looking forward to welcoming them in our network. I expect next challenges to go live in summer this year. They will be focusing on similar questions that we had before, and some more that we will be able to talk on in a couple of days. I think there's no big surprises here when we look at space questions or some novel materials. I think there's some very obvious use cases that will come to mind. So we're looking at exactly these kind of developments over the next years. We're also looking at increasing our footprint. We've just announced a doubling of our network of accelerator sites and test centers. We now count over 200 sites and are very much looking forward to including Swedish sites in the next couple of weeks and months. So I would stop here and back to you in the studio. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Morris. And I could witness myself as we had the opportunity to join in for a day down in Copenhagen a month and a half ago when the Copenhagen, the Danish Diana Accelerator at the Quantum Deep Tech Lab had its kickoff with companies and with people from Diana and so on. It was really vivid and lively and exciting atmosphere. So thanks a lot. About the next round of calls from you, when do you plan to have them out? And as far as I can remember from the plan, you started with 3 challenges last year, and you plan for 5 challenges this year, and then in full-fledged you will have 10 challenges per year. Is that still the plan, and when is the call out?
Thanks a lot, Carl, and thanks for forcing me to come out with more information. And maybe before I answer that question, I just wanted to make one point here, because you mentioned Copenhagen and the Danish site, and I think the Danish site is actually a very nice example of an additional element that we want to create with Diana. If you look at the companies that are present in Copenhagen, we have 2 companies from Spain, 2 from the UK, 1 from Lithuania, 1 from Turkey, and 1 from Canada. And really, these companies come together once a month in Copenhagen to learn, to work together, to collaborate, and to leverage the offers that the Copenhagen quantum ecosystem has to offer. What I love about this element, and that's the case for all of our accelerators, I could say this about all other sites, but you just mentioned Copenhagen, so I'll pick on them, is in addition to making these companies grow, we're also exposing them to talent from across the alliance. And really, we're creating an awareness among these companies that there is a shared responsibility amongst them to get to shape, together with NATO, together with governments, the security environment of tomorrow. And I think there's, for me as a political scientist by training, that's a big element for me to create this kind of political consciousness as well within the ecosystem to help us build new capacities there. When we look at next challenges, you're completely right in terms of the numbers. We're looking at launching 5 challenges this summer. I think we're looking at June, July timeframe. We will communicate on that both on our LinkedIn page and on our website. As I just said, I think there's going to be some repetition in the challenges simply because we saw quite a lot of market signal there, but we're looking at space technologies, novel materials, and in general, enhancing resilience questions, these kind of the overall topics without going into the specifics here that are still under the discussion. The ambition is indeed to scale the number of programs in the next months, and already next year we want to be launching up to 10 challenges, and then we'll see where it goes. I think there's also merit in exploring whether we always going to exploring different TRL levels, exploring different sizes of cohorts, exploring different grant sizes. So I think there's different models that we can explore in the future to also make Diana more inclusive and welcoming to everybody.
Super interesting, and we as we have joined NATO now from Sweden, we will be part of this journey. We're looking forward to that, and to come back to you, Morris, here during the rest of the event. Katarina, you're the CEO of the Swedish accelerator / incubator that is going to be part of this this exciting journey with Diana. Please give us some ideas from basically civil ecosystem perspective. Albeit one which is located in Linköping with a lot of defense industry. So could you give us a bit of a view of what you see coming out of this, and how could the civilian innovation sector help out with defense solutions?
Yeah, thank you. I will try to set the scene of where I come from. As you said, we are located in Linköping and Norrköping, so Östergötland is the county. And we have been an incubator since 2002, so we have been working for a long time, and we are really close connected to Linköping University. Our core is that we are really good in accelerating complex advanced technology. Mainly 50% is spin-offs from the university, but other ideas comes out from the corporates and industry around us. So getting from the idea out to scaling company, we know how to do that, and we know that it takes a lot of time. We have also worked really close in connection to both Saab and the Total Defense Research Center that's close connected to us as well. But that has mainly been about spin-outs the days before. And what I see now we have to look into how do we do spin-ins. And I think we have both within the Östergötland ecosystem, but also we are really great in Sweden to cooperate all over Sweden because we are such a small country. So we have had the national incubation program for many years. So we know each other really well, and we know when to connect to be even better, because we can't be the best in every single thing. So we need to connect, and we are great at that. And what I see is that we can, around Östergötland, create a really great environment for creating like a test area where we could do the spin-ins to get the startups meeting up with both Saab and other security companies, as well as the defense system, which are really close to us in Östergötland as well. I was listening to the Swedish Minister of Defense, Pål Jonsson, yesterday, and he was pointing out some challenges, and I think we have to look into that, because working with startups, you have to be agile and quick, and maybe not that's what we are talking about or thinking about when we are talking about defense. As you said, it's long turnarounds, maybe it's 5 or 10 or 30 years of how to buy things. And we need to challenge that and see how can we do it quicker and in a more easy way. Maybe we can have like a test arena which is open for many people, and then take a few of them into a more closed area in some way. So we need to challenge that as well, because we are dealing with people, so it's about the cultural change. So both from the startup side to teach them or to let them learn how to cooperate with defense industry, but also talking to the defense industry, say how can you deal with startups? We actually was one of the founders of Ignite Sweden. I don't know if you know what that is, but that was about finding out that it's really hard for a startup to do the first business with a corporate, and at least with a big corporate, because you never get up on the high level where you need to be. But then we made a joint venture together with some other incubators here in Sweden. So we both did the discussion, took the discussion with the corporates. Okay, here you have like a manuscript. You will have a 20 minutes meeting with this startup and you will follow this. And we also did the sales training with the startups. You will meet the corporates. And here is you have the 20 questions. You have 20 minutes and you start now.
Speed dating.
Yeah, and that has actually felt out really, really good, and it's still up there and running. So if we can do that together with the defense industry in some way, I think it's really, really something we are into there.
Excellent, and what I hear from you is that Swedish startup community has a lot to offer to the defense sector.
Absolutely.
Before we head, do we have any questions?
We do.
We do have questions.
Certainly.
But before we turn to the questions from the floor, I have to ask you a question that Pål Jonsson, our Minister for Defense, posed yesterday when he was here at the Swedish Innovation Days. You could look back at his presentation, very well phrased about the need for civilian-based innovation to join with the defense sector. So find that out on the website. But he posed one particular question to the defense industry, and so I read from the paper here, really about the readiness to engage with its vibrant innovation sector and its accompanying challenges. So what's the challenge for the defense sector? Are you up to it, was essentially his question.
I guess this is coming at me, isn't it, this one? So I think it's a really timely question, because yesterday we had a strategy offsite, within the company, and a lot of the discussion was centered around how we as a company, and I think it's fair to say probably across the industry, can work faster, to work at a quicker tempo and a quicker pace. And there's a rationale for that is not just about engaging with startups, that's part of it. But fundamentally, there is a war in Europe right now, and the need for armaments, for production of stuff, to support nations as defense spending increases and so forth, that is placing huge demand on the entire industry. So you're seeing really, I think, a bit of a paradigm shift in how companies in the defense industry are going to operate, or are thinking about operating. And getting into specifics, what I mean by that is that, I think there is a real question to be had now about, all right, should we as industry be much more like commercial sectors and build stuff, whatever it is, doesn't matter, and actually have it as inventory and have it available on the shelf and to a standard that the company determines, as opposed to very tailored, very bespoke standards that often come when dealing with governments. And that's a very different way of thinking about things. It involves huge amounts of cash, which is obviously getting tied up in inventory. But what that way of thinking sort of unlocks is the ability to move faster, to move at a quicker tempo and pace. And it's a natural tendency then to then be working more in step with startups and so forth, who are accustomed to just a much quicker decision making. So I think, is industry up for this? I think really this comes down to about risk appetite, and the question becomes, how much risk is industry willing to take in kind of leaning in to making stuff and investing corporate money on things when perhaps there aren't any contracts there at the moment necessarily, versus the risk of not doing that and not having the sheer capacity to build and all the rest of it, but kind of sticking to the current model. And that's the dilemma that across North America and Europe is the whole industry is facing. And it will take some bold moves, I think, to address some of this. But it's about risk.
But I mean, that's industry. But the defense itself, I mean, the defense authorities, maybe you're from a defense authority, Morris, if you, I mean, isn't it, money is flowing now to defense sector? Isn't it just to purchase the innovations, to commission the innovations? Would that be solving the problem?
Yeah, Carl, I think you make a very valid point here, and I mean one of the big challenges we have right now is now to translate ambition into action. And when we look at the procurement cycles that we have in the defense establishment, they're not attuned to working with startups, not at all. I mean, if you have a procurement timeline of 6 years, that's when most companies run out of or most startups run out of runway or get sold or whatever. I mean, they're not going to engage in a procurement process where you first have to read 3,000 pages and then go through a 6-year process to work with defense and security. I think the other question is a little bit is it actually realistic that now governments and armed forces are directly buying from startups? I think we also need to be conscious that when we look at the innovation ecosystem, and for example, when we look at the Diana cohort, the biggest company has around 60 employees. Most of our companies are pre-revenue. Most of our companies are looking at raising money. It's completely unrealistic to just say, okay, now they're going to provide a new system to the Swedish armed forces. And I think there we will have to look at cooperation with larger system integrators to actually help these companies in scaling and in developing their ideas further and really integrating them into larger capacities. I think at the same time, what you definitely see is that also, and I think this was mentioned by the Swedish defense minister as well, that there is a need to, and I think there's a growing awareness that there is a need to actually change the way we conduct business in the defense and security environment, how we procure and how we interact and how we communicate about the needs that we have in our respective fields of responsibility. I think there's a real clash of cultures here, of where you have accountability versus agility and so on and so forth. But these are not necessarily oppositions that are impossible to unite and to solve. And I think there's many entities out there that have shown us how to do that. And I think it's also clear when we look at, for example, at Ukraine right now, that as soon as there is really a sense of urgency and a need, well, then you get creative and you start reviewing procedures. I think there's a very clear political signal that we need to do more, but there's a lot of potential to explore how to do it actually better and how to also integrate lessons learned and best practices from across the alliance to shape that in the future.
Thanks. Katarina, would you like to add anything? This question was really for the guys here from the defense sector.
But I can add that I really agree that it's not, most of the companies that we work with, they are like 4 people and really small. It's not realistic to say that they do a big affair with the defense industry. But maybe we can see how can they connect to bigger corporate, and through that, the corporate will be the buyer of the things that the startups do, and then the corporate will do the business with the defense.
Exactly, and that's why the event Moritz alluded to earlier in Amsterdam next week, and sort of follow-on sort of tech days and so forth of those Diana startups are so important, because it's then a bit of a showcase, if you like, for corporates to be able to then see, okay, where can you engage with these startups and so on and so forth, and not smother them, allow that creativity to continue, but kind of take away just some of the friction and admin associated to defense contracting.
Great.
And also letting them be aware that you have to do some choices during the way. If you choose wrong in the beginning, then you can't make a business with the defense because you have chosen the wrong way from the beginning.
Absolutely, Katarina. Just to footstomp your point here, because I think that's a critical one that you just made. I think Diana gives us one really critical advantage here, and that is that we are able to engage early with these companies. We're engaging with them long before they're actually ready to provide capabilities. And that means that through the program, through the modules that these companies are going through, they're actually becoming, well, they start understanding the defense and security ecosystem. And we're not telling them not to do business with certain countries, but we're telling them what it means if you accept investments from certain countries for your business in the future. We're teaching them how to interact with defense and security end users. And I think with Rob, we've done a couple of events where it was very clear that there's translation issues, and you pitch differently to a general than you pitch to a VC investor. And I think all of these elements are critical. And I think for us, what's important here to note is we're also really happy if these companies simply and only become really successful commercial companies, because that also means that we have a variety of commercial civilian companies out there that are ready to engage with defense and security because they know what defense and security looks like, and we've kind of demystified defense and security for them.
Good. This panel is like a self-playing piano. But I think we have a few questions from the floor.
We do.
And Alma, please. And if you could give quick responses. I'm not sure that the kind of questions that you could have quick responses to, but let's try.
I have a few good ones here.
Yeah?
So I think one question that's popped up that is quite straightforward also based on Moritz, what you said, the sense of urgency. We have a question here that says, dual use is all good, but who finances SME startups to innovate the single-use military technologies we need even more to prevail on the battlefield?
Shoot, who starts? Who will finance single-use battlefield technologies?
I'm happy to jump in, but I don't want to. I can't see the room very precisely, so I'm happy to jump in. So I think if we look at single-use startups, I mean, they have similar issues as the dual-use ones, especially when it comes to getting introductions, getting exposure to the defense and security environment. I think if we look at the single-use ones, there are innovation and acceleration programs by primes that are a bit more focused onto helping them grow, helping them succeed. I think we need to differentiate, though, that really with Diana, what we're looking at is widening and growing the ecosystem, not vertically but horizontally, in terms of players that are willing and able to engage with defense and security. So I absolutely get the point, and I think that it's an important one to address. But I think this is something where the pathway is much clearer in terms of where the single kind of purpose startups have to go in order to scale and grow their business.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone who wants to chip in, or should we take the next question?
Let's take the next one.
Yeah.
Let's go. Is it only about tech? How about capabilities like improvisation skills, renewal and innovation capabilities and capacity, innovation in the broad sense view like new processes, organization models, businesses?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll start very briefly with this one. Absolutely, business model innovation is fundamental. It's why I kind of just touched on that idea about how primes maybe want to rethink the ways in which primes do business. But yes, and also people. This is a why do most startups fail or succeed? It's predominantly the people, the individuals, the team. How that team functions together and how they work together, and so on and so forth. And you can have the most amazing technology in the world, but if you haven't got a strong team that are able to work within a marketplace and get stuff to market, it's kind of irrelevant. So completely concur. Whilst the discussion has been predominantly on technology, the people part of this is absolutely fundamental. And Katarina, I'm sure you've got some thoughts on
No,
this.
I fully agree. And I would say that what the incubators, at least in Sweden, do is also to reinvent on the business models. So it's also about innovative new business models, absolutely. So that it's not needed to be tech.
Yeah, and it's because ultimately you want to be creating value, but also capturing value.
Yeah,
and it's not always going to be the same way with the same sort of customer. So yeah, you're totally spot on. Yeah.
I have a good one for you, Katarina. How might Sweden carve out its niche in Diana, enhancing the program with our unique capabilities? What are they?
that was a really good one. And I would love to discuss that more with you, because how understanding... What I would say is that we have a, in one way, unique situation where we have a really strong defense industry. We have a great innovative system around incubators and science park, and we have some great test beds. So together we can create that platform, how to meet and really understand each other, how to bring this, how to not only spin out, then to spin in.
And
I don't know if you agree.
No, I do. I think you've got. I think that naturally exists in Sweden, and you can see that with the amazing technologies that come from the country. I think there's also another part here that I think Sweden's quite well placed to, and it goes back to this rapid acquisition service that Morris alluded to and I talked about at the beginning, whereby I think there's an opportunity here to complement the 200-odd test centres and so forth, of having some sort of centre of excellence, or whatever you wish to call it, that genuinely brings about expertise in how you do rapid acquisition. Maybe looking at different parts of government, different areas, because this problem cannot be intractable, but it's a fundamental issue that hits every single nation. So I think Sweden's got a ton of insight based upon the ways it's done business previously, that could complement the technology ecosystems that exist as well.
And I guess this is a question that goes beyond defense sector. This is a generic government
correct
public acquisition issue, right?
If we solve that, that's brilliant for many countries.
Yeah, that's innovation.
Not only for the defense industry, for sure.
Morris.
And I think just one point to add here, and Katarina, I haven't been to the Lead Accelerator yet, but my girlfriend's family summer house is in St. Anna, so just
then you're welcome.
Yeah, I will come by the summer. Don't you worry.
Yeah, that's great.
When I have to escape. No, what I want to say is, I think another element that Sweden really brings to the table is culturally, when you look at the startup ecosystem, and I think. I don't know how familiar the viewers are, for example, when you compare the Swedish startup innovation ecosystem to the rest of Europe. I think in Sweden, I think that the social security standards that you have actually allow for quite a lot of risk taking. There's a ginormous amount of clever ideas that are coming out of Sweden and ideas that are getting spun out. You have with Daniel X somebody who has created a very successful company in Sweden and has now invested actually 100 million into a defense startup in Germany. So I think you actually have, in addition to obviously technological knowledge and academic excellence, you also have an ecosystem which has already at least partially embraced the wider responsibility.
5 seconds. So I will just thank you for those final words. We have a lot to offer, and thank you, everyone.